Hello and welcome to the Bit of a Tangent podcast, where we bring you mind-bending ideas from science, philosophy, artificial intelligence, and medicine. I'm Gianluca, a data scientist with a background in computer science and genetics, and, as always, I'll be joined by my co-host Jared, Bayesian, autodidact, and, when he finds time, medical student. In this episode, we depart on a number of conversational tangents, including my new habit formation framework and future habit-related projects, Jared's heuristics for a good day, and the consequences of sleep deprivation, especially on students, and in particular, medical students. As usual, everything we talk about, and much that we don't, can be found in the show notes for the episode. This was quite a fun one for us that touched on topics we have spent a great deal of time experimenting with and reading about. It also came at a point where we were really finding our rhythm with these recorded conversations. So we hope you like it. And without further ado, here's the episode of Bit of a Tangent. So I wanted to start with a few things that are just easy to do, because what I'm doing is I'm testing a new habit formation system based on some of the ideas in Atomic Habits by James Clear. So I know we've both recently read that. So the difference in the past, I always used to go, cool, what are my year's goals? What does like my ideal year look like? And then I would kind of like set up all these habits and start tracking them. And it was all about like measuring how much I did as opposed to building the habits, right? And what I've realized over the years through experience and through more research on this is that like you can't just, dive in all at once. It's going to fail. Right. It's going to just overwhelm you. And then you're going to end up doing none of it. Or you can end up doing like 10% of what you aimed for on each habit and feeling horrible about it. So what I've adapted to doing is I build up habits one at a time. And so I'm not allowed to add a new habit until I have some sort of pre-met condition of chaining on the existing habits. Okay. Right. So what I wanted to do is start with really simple habits, right? So things that are just super easy to do, really quick to build up and just get the momentum going. So on there is like weighing myself every morning, and taking creatine every morning. So those are like the two starting ones. So I can start building up chains on those. So like when I get to, if I have 5 habits, when I get to 30, then cool, then I qualify to add a new habit, and then that continues. So it stops me from just adding more habits as I think of them, and actually to start enforcing them one at a time.
So it's almost an incentive. It's almost an incentive to get better, because habits are fun, let's be honest.
Exactly, right? So I'm always like, oh, now I want to add meditation, but now I'm like, cool, I haven't added it yet because I have to finish my current set of habits, which include things like leaving work before 6 p.m. because that's something I'm terrible at. I tend to just stay and get distracted. Eating my meal prepped lunch every work day, exercising every day after work. Yeah, and so the aim is to just build that up one at a time. So like next time I'd add like meditation or whatever, and they're all designed to be very much trigger based, right? So it's always like exercise when getting home from work, or it's like weigh myself first thing in the morning, or take creatine with water when I take my medication in the morning. So it's all very much trigger based. So it's not like just do X today. Just trying to build up the habits and get that all going. So that's kind of the focus at the moment, is just putting in the grind, the boring, hard hours of building those up, and then I can get to the more fun habits.
Yeah. How would you, Gianluca, how do you think about the sort of trade-off between, or at least maybe the alleged trade-off between living a somewhat almost spontaneous, carefree life versus this very regimented, like habitual life? So like, let me give you an example. Maybe someone who criticizes like a highly habitualized life would say, if you're never making space for spontaneity, when your friend phones you at like 9 o'clock and says, dude, let's go grab a couple beers. I know it's a Tuesday, but like we haven't done this in forever. What do you think about, right? And obviously the really disciplined person says, I have a rule, I don't drink on weeknights. And the other person might say, and let's exclude for the sake of argument here, like the extreme, the person who is drinking every weeknight. That person should not be drinking. But let's take the person who is fairly regimented, has good habits in place, and now is being tempted off the path. How do you negotiate that? Because I don't know, I'm not very clear on that, frankly.
Oh yeah, hundreds. It's a difficult thing, right? Because it's like you want the purpose of the habits is to improve your life, right? So if the habits suddenly become a barrier to living the life you want, then that's obviously a challenge, because it's now, well, you're trying to live the ideal lifestyle in the long term, which is why you have the habits, but yet the short term seems to conflict with that. So, for example, drinking during the week, right? I've been focusing on just not drinking at all between sunset on Sunday night and sunset on Friday night. But then between those other hours, cool, whatever, go wild. Hopefully without getting blacked out. But let's say friends in town, haven't seen them in ages. Cool, they call me up. Maybe right before I wouldn't take too well, but like let's say the day before, and they're like, can we meet me for like 2 beers after work or whatever tomorrow?
Yeah.
For catch up. I'm only in town this one day. Then it makes sense, right, to do that. And we're all aware of this at some level, right? There's always some set of conditions at which point no one would hesitate to break out of their habits and their routines, right? Like the building's on fire. Do you still stop to weigh yourself in the morning? Obviously not.
Yes, okay. So at the absurd level, I get that.
Yeah, right. So there's some level at which we all agree you need to deviate from the regular routine. And then at which point it becomes, reasonable, is up to you as an individual and based on your own assessment. That's why, it's part of the reason why I'm trying to test out this new system, which is a much more like hard, algorithmically focused way of building habits, in that I'm free to break my habits whenever I want.
Yeah.
But there's a consequence to that, right? So the consequence is, if I still want to be able to make progress, and add more habits, then I need to break habits in such a way that I still get up to the necessary change, right? So if I slack off, and so let's say one of my habits was to not drink during the week. It's something I've kind of just internalized now from doing it for many years, but like, let's say that was something I was working on. I would go, okay, cool. Well, I'll break the habit. I've got a chain of 5. Let's say I'll break that to meet up with this friend that I never see and have drinks in the week. But then I know I've got to put in the hard yards in terms of exercising and doing all the other habits to make sure I still get up to that goal I'm working towards, right? So now it becomes about, cool, make sacrifices to get these exceptional spontaneous moments, right? And if they are truly spontaneous, they're infrequent.
That's a good rule of thumb as well, because otherwise you find yourself having these spontaneous moments once a week, right?
Exactly, and that's and it's very easy to get into that mindset. I mean, if you last year I was living alone, and with my diet, it's very easy to like make those little exceptions, right? You're like, I'm just this week is just really busy, and I have that thing, and so I'll just like have something quick and easy, like a pre-made meal, for this evening, and then one thing becomes another, and suddenly you're like, okay, 3 nights a week you're actually not sticking to your diet, right? And that's how things slide. It's very easy to make exceptions. It's very hard to stick to the habits. And so my bias is definitely set in favor of, or sort of my cultivated bias is set in favor of sticking to the habits. But like you say, there is, need and desire for spontaneity in life. So it's all about that balance. It's slightly different for every person and for every habit. But that's why I'm trying this new approach out.
Okay. So what's on the horizon? If you
for further habits?
Yeah, I mean, if you earn it, what are you going to choose to do?
Yeah, so the next one is definitely to incorporate regular meditation practice. It's something that I've found very difficult to implement this year, living with someone else again, and especially because it's a significant other. So it's not like it's separate rooms or anything like that. It's very hard to get like quiet time, and preferably in the morning, right, which is the ideal time to be meditating. So it is very hard to get quiet, undisturbed time when everyone's getting ready and it's hustle and bustle. So I try and find a good trigger for that. So I'm actually happy that I've got some time to start thinking about how best to implement it, and to figure out some triggers. So that would be one of the next ones. And then I've got like a whole bunch of other things I want to try. Actually, let me bring up like Evernote, because I keep a doc of like future. I actually call it's lifestyle experiments for the future. So it's not just habits. It's a whole bunch of things. So let me bring that up. And while I'm doing that, what is your current sort of habit framework look like, if you have one?
I can speak to that. So I guess currently the most regular set of behaviors, I've kind of thought of different ways to negotiate this trade-off between getting some like the important things done and like this very rule-based lifestyle versus allowing some space for spontaneity. And there's two approaches that I found that worked, and I'm currently using one more than the other. The one approach is like very strict rules where you just almost the bar is set so high for cheating that you end up really saying no to a lot of things. So like the bar might literally be, unless there is a fire, I am not missing this habit cue.
Sure.
But the approach I'm using more currently, so for just a good example of that kind of thing would be if you did that like Whole30 diet, because it is so restrictive, you end up just saying no to everything. You want to eat out at this restaurant? Oh, sorry, I can't. I'm doing 30 days of just like pure asceticism when it comes to food. But what I've done now, right, is I've written a little list on my wall, and it's about 6 things which make a good day, like which make a day a success, right? And that's basically a good night's sleep, meditation, exercise, fasting, and like good nutrition, deep work, and then like solid social relationships.
Yeah, deep connection.
Deep connection. That's a good way to put it. And so the nice thing about that is I've actually moved away a little bit from the Q habit, routine, reward model that James Clear advocates, because I've just been focusing on getting those things done. Although there is still some element of routine to that. I mean, like my meditation routine is well established at this point. Whereas like something like deep work is something I'm doing much more. It sounds paradoxical to say this about deep work, but just ad hoc, as opportunistic as I can. But that's more a structure of my day than anything else. But things that I'm doing daily, taking creatine, similar to you. I take vitamin D. I think that healthcare workers generally should.
Yeah. But, after our discussion about that, which I think actually was in our food break between episodes 4 and 5.
Yeah.
Like I was debating like how soon I should start taking vitamin D, because in summer I feel like I'd probably get enough sun exposure, but then into winter it becomes more of a problem. And then after that conversation, and given where we live and the prevalence of sort of dormant tuberculosis, I've started taking my vitamin D every day. So yeah, that's definitely one. But I'm already taking pills every day, so I just had to add it to the pill box. I don't even have to think about it now.
A well-established habit. Yeah, I get
you. Yeah, exactly.
And if I had to look at other things that I'm doing which fall under that, is I've tried to really encompass like a sort of element of gratitude, and like, I mean, you could call it whatever you want, but I guess the simplest name is like that, like loving kindness meditation in some sense. I found it makes me like 5% less likely to be shitty in any given day, and probably 20% more likely to like look out and see other human beings as just almost miraculous sources of actual wonderment, which sounds way, way, way more woo than I'm comfortable being.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I must say, with the loving kindness meditation, when I have done it, and there's a really interesting commitment device to doing it, which is in Oak, the meditation app that I primarily use. The shortest mindfulness meditation you can use is 10 minutes. but there's a loving kindness meditation that's 5 minutes. So sometimes when you're short on time, you're like, cool, I guess I'll do the loving kindness meditation because that allows me to do the shorter one. And I will say with that, they work you through this progression of saying these sort of mantras to yourself, and then thinking about someone in your life and saying the mantras to them, and then thinking about like every living being, right? And it definitely ties into the idea of a sort of a Harry's Patronus from Methods of Rationality, for anyone who gets that reference. But yeah, sort of just the transhumanist vision of what the essence of, or at least the most meaningful and valuable and worthwhile things inside humans are, and sort of looking to feel a loving kindness towards those aspects of humanity, but for all humans, and sort of all humans, stretching out into the future as well. But yeah, it's an interesting one. It does sound incredibly woo, but it's palpably beneficial to mood and social interactions.
Yeah, that's a really big one for me, and I guess it is, as you say, that the mood component is vital almost, and I've noticed a big difference in the sense that, or maybe I've noticed is the wrong metric to use, but it seems like other people have noticed. I seem to have been less adversarial, hopefully more generative, but less adversarial.
The ML crowd is just, they're loving it. Eh?
This
is also a little circle jerk of all the ML fans. And now we're just going to whisper back prop. Ear to ear whispering.
Well, it just got
there's definitely a niche in the market for someone to do ASMR machine learning tutorials, right?
Imagine.
Yeah, coding TensorFlow ASMR. It's just like,
yeah, we need a
it's just the key clicks, right? And it's just screencast. Yeah, the layers of the convolutional network.
Oh, amazing!
It's like doing hand motions.
Like at least some percentage of anyone listening to this is just thinking, oh fuck it, I'm unsubscribing. I mean,
yeah.
Whatever I thought these people had, they don't have it. They're speaking about hand waving and loving kindness.
Yeah, totally. Right, like if this was the first one you listened to, that you've definitely been put off. You're like, I came here for hard rationality and AI. They threw me the bone of one HP more reference, but other than that, it's just been fucking woo.
Oh, shame.
So coming back to the habits and the habit frameworks, some of the things that I am looking to implement in the future, something called the 5-minute favor, and I've hyperlinked it here, but this was ages ago.
Yeah, remember
but I think it was something along the lines of like try and do a quick favor for someone every social interaction, like significant social interaction, like things like I think it was to do with if you hear that someone's interested in X and someone else who's like proficient in that or whatever, just be like, oh hey, should I connect you up with this person I know and maybe you two can get in touch, that kind of thing. And just if you're always the person doing that, then you're always going to be involved in positive feedback loops where people are doing meaningful things and connecting ideas in interesting ways, and you'll just be a sort of vector for serendipity.
I like the
I literally, that just came to me right now. I've been coming up with vector terms all day, and that worked. Right. So yeah, that's one.
What I was going to quickly say on that is it's actually a very similar idea to one that I've thought about before and tried, but only half-heartedly, is like every time you see a person trying to cultivate the habit of just asking, what can I do to help this person? Which is a very similar thing. Like trying to notice opportunities to do even something tiny. As you say, connections tend to give like disproportionate value. Like something that I do, I think fairly well, is like send on resources to people who I think might find them useful or might open a new direction of thinking, and so that links up quite nicely there.
That's very true. I just clicked the link and it's from that 80,000 hours mother of all articles about how to just like be good at life. And it was under like section 6, in terms of practical tips on how to build connections. And then they just kind of have it as a throwaway line there, five minute favor. But I mean, this was that article where I had it saved in Pocket because I think you had recommended it or something. And it took me like 3 days to get through it because there was just like links everywhere. And I just ended up adding like 400 new articles to Pocket because everything just linked to something else that was a gold mine. I think another thing I may have picked out from there was implementation intentions, which have they come up in Atomic Habits, but there's an actual paper on it and how it makes you more effective at implementing habits. So I guess I can actually check that one off the list. I've just inadvertently happened to come back to that without directly intending to. So maybe that says something for the implementation intention of writing it down in the first place, but that's getting a bit too meta for this point in the evening.
Perhaps.
And one was quite interesting was to have daily or weekly stories. So I got this from I think it was an Art of Manliness podcast, but I may stand to be corrected on that, with a guy who considers himself to be like an expert storyteller, and his way of coming up with good stories, he just writes down like one story from his day every day, and over time he just ends up his life improves because he's aware of the meaningful moments in his life more. So it's kind of like a journaling practice, but it also serves to give you a whole collection of really good, interesting stories you can tell when you're interacting with people, right? Because I mean, stories are a fundamental way of connecting human beings, and the more sort of communal they are, the better. So to write down a story from your day, as simple as it might be, or from your week. So that's one I might implement in the future. And then it's like other stuff like, nice one. Like eating your frogs, to use the productivity school of thoughts. I can't remember the author's name, but yeah, it's one of those classic productivity books, like in the same vein as Getting Things Done or any of those kind of things, which is just like do your most important project first thing every day before everything else gets in the way and when your willpower is highest. That's probably something that doesn't work so well in a 9-to-5 style job necessarily, but definitely as a student, or if you're doing like postgraduate type stuff, or if you're doing any kind of research, then it's absolutely valuable. Cold exposure, cold showers, and maybe perhaps morning swims. That's one. And then an interesting, other ones that are just throwaway ones are like writing 100 words every morning for 90 days, just to sort of get into the flow of writing again. And then one that is quite fun potentially is to improve one tiny thing each day or week, depending on how you implement it. So you just have to like make something 1% better in your life every day, which actually could get quite challenging. So it might be best done as like a 30-day challenge or something. But if you just look at the compound benefits, right? So it's like, cool, just like all those like little things, like the cable that keeps falling down from the desk onto the floor that you have to keep picking up or whatever, just like attach that clip to the desk that will stop that from happening, right? Like just like one thing like that every day for some aspect of your life that improves it at any to any extent. And so that's one that I'm also really keen to experiment with and just see like over the course of 30, 60, 90 days, how much better your like daily routine or daily life can actually become.
Yeah, like it's like slowly just decreasing the amount of chaos that seems to permeate life.
Exactly. I mean, there are those things out there, right? So one for me was like learning to fold cables by hand really well. Like they come when they're new, where you do that like S shape, the figure 8 shape thing, and it takes you like a week or two to learn to do it quickly. But I've never had to untangle a cable ever since I learned how to do that. And it's one of those things that's just like, it's so trivial, but it just improves your life by 1%, and it compounds on itself. But yeah, I'm interested to know if you have, because I really like your formulation of what like an ideal day in your life looks like, you know, like a day you can be satisfied by, or satisfied about at the end. I'm interested to know, like, do you then have like sort of stretch goals in a habit sort of sense of things that you would like to be doing every day? Or do you feel like you have a pretty good formulation and it's just about, putting in the hours every day?
I guess I do have like some ideas in mind that you could call stretch goals. So I mean, like I would call my baseline. Let's take meditation. My minimum is going to be about 15 minutes, but if I've got more time in the morning, the stretch becomes, I try and aim for like half an hour, that kind of thing, right? The biggest area that I try and stretch is on the work front, and particularly on like actual like hours cross with understanding of something like technical and difficult. Like I think we both have experienced that satisfaction of like really getting your teeth into something that's difficult on a conceptual level, right? And for me, that's almost just a feeling like I couldn't have done much more given the time I had for a given day, because I mean, when you've lost time spinning silly cycles, spending too much time having to whether it's prepare food or drive in traffic or something mildly avoidable. And so I guess like you could call it, if I could push for like 3 or 4 hours of like really good studying besides my daily obligations as a medical student, that's like a pretty good day.
Yeah. Okay, so the stretch for you is sort of within the existing habits, right? So it's like it's the quantity of the thing as opposed to adding new qualities.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that for the most part. I mean, there's like a few. Actually, no. There's a few ideas that I want to implement sometime soon, but so far there's nothing that I've like implemented at a low level and then have wanted to add on more, like a more difficult version.
Sure, because I don't know. I think it's also probably a product of the hype around morning routines and habits and things like that. There just seem to be so many interesting things that offer some benefit out there. Everyone's like, oh, the gratitude journaling and it's amazing and it's life-changing, and everyone's like, oh, the cold exposure, it's amazing, and meditation, it's amazing, and all these things. Then I'm like, cool, that would be great to try.
I think the one of the things about that, right, is each of those people has like found their thing and is going from a place of, let's just call it like pure disordered maximum chaos, right? And now they've chosen one thing and they've settled on it. And I think like almost from a place of chaos, any routine is a good thing. It's like I think it's the same kind of effect as the carnivore diet. Is it the most efficacious, important diet? Not convinced. But if you've been eating really badly and you suddenly give your guts a big break because you feed it fairly natural, and yes, before anyone tells me that arsenic and cyanide are natural as well, I'm aware, I use that line too. But as in unprocessed, perhaps easier on the gut food for a while, and suddenly you get a chance to sort of recuperate. And I think just adding any routine and sticking with it kind of has that effect.
Totally.
But I actually think that there's a negative effect from stacking too many morning routines.
Absolutely. And there's the sort of the guilt and the sense of failure when you can't make them all stick, because no one, I think one of those great memes that went around was just like, my self-employed digital nomad ultimate morning routine. And it was like, I wake up at 3 a.m. and meditate for 7 hours, and then I like go to gym and then I do like cold exposure, and then I journal for 4 weeks, and then it was just like the most out there. And it's like, and then I'm finally finished with my morning routine at 8 p.m. After which I do 2 minutes of work and then start winding down for the evening, like something along those lines. But it was just a
4-hour work week.
Exactly right. It was just a perfect encapsulation of all the negatives associated with trying to design a sort of perfect morning routine. I suppose it's kind of the I don't know who to attribute the quote to, but it was in reference to meditation, right? And it was like the best meditator is the one who meditates. It's kind of like that, it's like the best morning routine is the one that you actually do. And it's just like with anything, right? Diet or exercise or whatever. Getting most of the way there consistently is far more important and valuable in terms of human stickiness than anything else. But coming back to what I was going to say earlier is that I was like, you know, perhaps it's some kind of like a Pareto distribution in terms of the habits, right? So like you gain a lot from some of them, but and that might be any collection of them, right? So but like you know, adding 3 or 4 habits gives you like 80% of the value, and then, you know, adding more, it's diminishing returns. You plateau in how much value you gain per minute or unit of energy spent, and so it's kind of really like finding which ones are most efficacious and most valuable to you, and then really sticking with those. Which is why I like your formulation of what a ideal day looks like. I'm trying to infer what my ideal day looks like from data, from the ground up, right? So every day I track a whole bunch of things and whether or not I did them, and I also track just the binary. Was today what I call a model day, right? And then it's either 1 or 0, and it's usually 0, right? But I think I've had about 10 in the last 8 months, model days, where I'm just like, that was if every day, that's the day I want every day of my life to be like. And then I just analyze the difference between the two classes with obvious balancing, you know, taken into account, and various other good data practices. But yeah, and then I can just look at all the features of those days versus any other day, and start to see what moves the needle. And my hope is that when I analyze that on my current corpus of data, I will be able to see in a hopefully unbiased way what actually does make my best days, as opposed to just going on my intuition. More just so that I can verify my intuition. But I would absolutely love to discover something there that surprises me. So it's going to be interesting to look into it. But I mean, I really like that formulation of just the key things that get a significant day out at the end.
Yeah. You know, I'm also always willing to, like, as you said, you know, almost smash things into reality and see what sticks. So I do also enjoy this general process of having that baseline, but then, you know, not as orderly as you adding them on, but adding something, and, you know, if you can do it for a week and then that turns into 2 weeks, oh, well, it's stuck, you quite like it, right? But, you know, I've thrown against reality a bunch of different habits which were okay. Maybe they added a bit of value, but ultimately they fell off, not due to anything except for the fact that they actually weren't that sticky, or they weren't as valuable for the amount of effort, you know? So, I mean, for me, gratitude journaling was a little bit like that, where it was nice to do, but didn't actually seem to be as easy or as useful as just sitting and trying to feel gratitude as like a felt emotion. And maybe that's also a function of just me being a bit too abstract. When I write something, it's too easy.
You can compartmentalize, and so it's not forcing you to feel.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You know? I generally, it's interesting. I also have a sort of tracking metric that's very similar to yours, although it's got a bit more gradation on it, of like how good or bad of a day was it, and also trying to pull in some correlation data from that. For me, honestly, one of the biggest things has been sleep. It is, it's almost repulsive the amount to which a slightly suboptimal night's sleep, it really, really affects my mood.
I mean, you can psychologically destroy someone with 3 nights of sleep deprivation.
Yeah.
And anyone who's pulled an all-nighter and then, you know, handed in whatever thing they were completing and felt the emptiness that comes after that knows exactly just how psychologically destabilizing a lack of sleep can be.
Yeah, that's the thing, right? So I don't know what sort of habits you have around sleep, but maybe that's actually something you want to go into.
I just try and keep it as consistent as possible. With my Aura Ring that I've had for, I think 3 months now, it's been really interesting to notice that I have this like yo-yo effect with bedtimes, right? So, and then that correlates to a yo-yo in sleep quality as well and duration. So if I'm consistent, everything's all fine. And then as soon as I have like one late night, it then throws a bit of a speed wobble in, and the wobble tends to accelerate. Like you can literally look at the plot, and it will wobble slightly and wobble more as time goes on. So it was just like that one thing destabilized me, and the speed wobble, then yo-yos me back and forth to mix my metaphors like an artist. And eventually it just causes such a big degradation in my sleep quality and quantity that it's as though I missed a night's sleep. And that's very, very dangerous. More of a problem during like holidays or periods of like crunching towards some deadline. So I will never pull an all-nighter ever again, like since I've started looking into the sleep data about 2 years ago. One thing that's very popular in my sort of sphere is hackathons that go for 24 hours. So that's for anyone who's not initiated, a hackathon is like when a whole bunch of tech people get together and they develop some idea over 24 hours, and it's often for like a competition, or it could also just be like within a company to just come up with new ideas for something or just for fun. But they tend, like a very popular one is to just do like order pizzas and drinks and whatever and just like go through the night, 24 hours round the clock. And that is the worst thing you could possibly do in terms of your stress level and your sleep, right? Like you're going to be feeling the repercussions of that months down the line. So I just won't do a 24-hour hackathon. And like they seem like they'd be fun, but I just know it's not worth it. And then I just try and stay as consistent as possible, because any destabilization has such horrendous effects, right? You get social jet lag is the term used, because you go out, on the weekends and you stay up 4 or 5 hours later than you normally would, and then you catch up the sleep the next day. And then when it comes to the week again and you have regular commitments, it's equivalent of having jet lag. Because the body's circadian rhythm can't adapt that rapidly, and so I just try and keep it as consistent as possible. So one thing that I think might help is I have sleep blocked out in my calendar as like a repeating event, and it's exactly the same every single day. So yeah, it's in there, and when you can see that block, and then you like have some social commitment that like overlaps with that, you can be like, this looks dangerous. So I would allow myself to like, and naturally it's going to swing a little bit depending on what's happening. I'm also the kind of person who struggles to get to sleep generally. But yeah, I think just controlling your environment. Okay, just like obvious sleep hygiene aside, right, like light and temperature and food consumption close to it, like, or get all of those obvious things out of the way. And if those aren't obvious to you, then like read Why We Sleep by Matthew Walker, or just do some basic research on the topic.
I'll jump in there. I'll jump in there and quickly add that if you don't want to read the book but have time for 5 hours of podcasts, Walker has a podcast with Joe Rogan, which is excellent, and then just recently did one with Rhonda Patrick, which was fantastic.
I've had this recommended to me via proxy from you, from Josh.
Must have been through Josh.
But, yeah, exactly. But it was great because I just didn't notice that one. I just slipped under the radar on my podcast feed, which admittedly is probably the most overpopulated thing since China reintroduced the many child policy. So it's so it slipped under the radar, but I'm very, very keen to listen to that because Rhonda Patrick gets into the weeds on technical details, and I think that's like one of the things that you can really like gain. Also, just as a refresher, right? Because the book is very long, and I took very thorough notes, but it's easy to forget some details. But yeah, nothing has impressed upon me the importance of sleep quite like that book.
Yeah.
And I think if you're gonna start fiddling with your sleep, read that first, right? If you start thinking, oh, let me try polyphasic sleep because then I only need to sleep 4 hours a day and I'll be so much more productive in the remaining hours, and I'm a, CEO of a startup and I needed, no, just fucking read the book first. Then when you understand all the variables at play and how hard things are to study and how much things can affect your performance psychologically, mentally, emotionally, physically down the line, then consider, what you're about to do. Because some of those results are just absolutely ridiculous. One of the most startling ones was the effect of alcohol.
Yeah, tell us that.
Right. So the as far as I remember, the study was conducted on college students, and they got a whole bunch of them in. They separated them into various groups, and then what they would do is receive a memorization type assessment. So they'd be given a whole bunch of stuff to memorize, and then they were let go. One group wasn't allowed to consume any alcohol. One group was allowed to consume alcohol 3 days, I think it was, afterwards, and then another group 7 days afterwards. And then they would bring them in and retest them and evaluate the recall. So the group that had no alcohol at all was baseline, and the ones that had alcohol, there may have been ones that had every day, I don't know. But the point of the study was that drinking alcohol affects your sleep, as drinking alcohol in the evenings affects your sleep enough that it can degrade the REM REM sleep, which helps with memory formation and with solidifying concepts, so much that even if you drank 6 days for the first time, 6 days after learning something, it would still have an effect on your memory and recall when you were then tested later, right? And so the context of this was, you've been studying all week for your exams next week, and you think, oh, as a reward, I've been studying so hard this whole week and so disciplined, I'm going to go out and have a few drinks on the Saturday with my friends before exams start on Monday. You're screwing yourself in terms of memorization, right? And obviously memorization is not the be all and end all of exam performance, but just in terms of the cognitive effects, right? That is incredible. The fact that a few drinks days after you encountered some information are harming your ability to recall it. The results and the whole book is just studies like this where the results are just absolutely horrifying.
Yeah, I almost the one thing I would say about that, right, is the one thing that is quite consistent in the book is just the sheer magnitude of the effect sizes here, right? And I'm always trying to forego the sort of rationalist trap of having, if your model explains all outcomes, then you have your model has no explanatory power, you have no knowledge. But so I'm trying to figure out for myself if these really strong outcomes, what reality do I anticipate? So if the outcomes, almost in my mind, if the outcomes were this profound, I would almost expect it to be more noticeable without the studies. But I then wonder, maybe this is the kind of effect you wouldn't notice. So, for example, if the one example he showed was how pulling an all-nighter decreases memory and learning by 40%. The test results were a 40% difference between two groups. And I was thinking, I've pulled all-nighters in service of tests before, and it's possible that there was a decrease, but 40% certainly wasn't the magnitude of it. And so I'm wondering if either the results are so positive that there should actually be strong evidence, in the sense that if you saw a really small effect size in such small group studies, you'd call into question. But here they're so large, there's almost certainly some underlying effect, even if it's smaller. Or are these results actually almost more called into question by just how strong the results are, in the sense that it makes me wonder, are the tests they're using too stereotyped? They're giving some sort of reaction time test that is, purports to measure how fast you react to something, but in reality, the reaction time test we take all the time is how fast you brake in a car. And I'm annoyed that my model doesn't discriminate between those two futures, because that clearly represents my lack of knowledge in this domain. But I'm not sure how to think about that, because I completely agree with you. And I'm in this very frustrating position at the moment where, obviously, and I should caveat all of this with saying that I apologize for sounding like I'm going to complain. But obviously, medical students we don't really get the choice about staying up all night, right? That's just something which is mandatory to do. And this is a conversation I've tried to have with like faculty members, in the sense of wondering, to what extent should we, and like, should we really be doing work during the day and then the whole night and then still staying up into the next day?
I mean, the results on this are clear, right? I mean, the whole reason that concept of medical students in residence working those ridiculous shifts was because the guy who instituted that convention was a cocaine addict.
Yeah.
That was the historical context of it, right? He was a cocaine addict, so he would just naturally be on these 36-hour benders, exactly, right? Yeah. And then he later, when being rehabilitated for his cocaine addiction, became a heroin addict as well, which I think is hilarious. But he he instituted this thing, and then it kind of just, I presume, became one of those sort of initiation style practices, in that it was like, it was like a bar
it happened to me, so it happens to you.
A little bit of that, and also a little bit of like, you want to like, weed out the toughest ones. But in Why We Sleep, he looks at the results of medical academic hospitals who are now implementing the policies of radically reduced shift lengths. And that, like, the incidence of errors goes down dramatically. The subjective performance goes up dramatically. All of these sort of things. I mean, it's another one of those things where it's like, how can you ignore the results of this? So I mean, the fact that you still have to even have this discussion with otherwise quite well informed, intelligent people is a concern, right? It's like this information just hasn't propagated, and I think a large reason behind that is that sleep science isn't a widely taught aspect of biology, of medicine, of anything really. It's its own sort of standalone interdisciplinary field.
Yeah, that's one aspect. Although, of course, I imagine at least one of the rejoinders to that would be, well, someone has to be awake at that time, right? I mean, and this kind of becomes like all jobs where someone has to do something which is frankly and obviously dangerous and probably bad for their health. But then I think the answer is people have to be properly compensated for it. So what I'm trying to think about, and I don't really have good answers here, is so when you are paying a university to educate you, and if you say to them, well, I'm like very reluctant to sacrifice maybe the health effects or whatever of sleeping badly, and it's not like I get compensated particularly for that time or that risk, and they might say then, oh no, the compensation is the education you get, like, or they could say, well, you don't have to be here, right? Like, you are here voluntarily. And I can imagine that almost being the open and shut case. I don't think, unless you found a very compassionate ear in this.
Well, I mean, once you start actually working directly with patients, then it's not up to you to make the choice anymore, because now you're having effects on other people, right? So at that point, well, then it's like, to be honest, I don't want the sleep-deprived student working on me. I want the well-rested student working on me. And if the data shows that they're safer, it's like saying you'd want to drive a less safe car because it's cheaper. It's like, well, yeah, to a point, that's because at some point it just becomes absolutely reckless. And so there's that for starters, but also, I mean, look, this from the inside, and I've experienced it firsthand, whereas I haven't, but to me, it just seems like a resource allocation problem. Instead of 5 people working 36-hour shifts, every few days, whatever, you just work a 5-hour shift more often, right? It's just now there's obviously overhead and some things like that, right? But it feels like there's some much more reasonable ways this can be done.
That is true. I think the one minor complication there, and for me, and this was just, I've had this argument with another medical friend, and his point of view is that having shorter shifts is bad because it increases the amount of times that different medical teams have to hand over patients to each other, and that this is like a large area where mistakes are made. But for me, that's just an indication. Like for me, how I view that is the sleep problem is largely intractable, right? As long as human biology is invariant in time. Whereas the ability for humans to like hand over a patient properly is like a very system tractable problem.
Totally.
You know, tick checklists, procedures, operating that
advances
kind of
in technology and organization systems can
Completely.
mitigate a large portion of that. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I think given the magnitude of the results, look, I think it's incredibly important to disseminate this information, and that's why I think everyone should read Why We Sleep. It's incredibly poignant and valuable piece of work. I wanted to chat about evening routines with you because we've chatted about morning routines to some extent, but I'm interested to hear how you use what you've read and what you know, both as a medical student and from reading Why We Sleep and from just being a person who's interested in these sort of things, about how you then implement your evening routine from a productivity and a sleep efficiency standpoint.
You know, as you say, I've read a fair amount about evening routines, and so you think I had a more concrete answer here, but I fall into like a fairly natural local minimum, as in something that I think is not globally optimal, but fairly good and captures most of the value here, which is just kind of noticing as I get tired. And the thing is, it is vulnerable to simple failures, like getting too hyped up and watching some YouTube. Basically, I try and just get in bed, turn off all the lights, and sit there and read on a Kindle or something. And I tend to notice my eyes getting heavy and fall asleep with that.
What sort of things are you reading in the evening?
You know, I'm not so much of an absolutist on one type of thing, although I do find, like, I'm trying to read a book on like mathematical logic at the moment, and that will not become my bedtime reading.
Sure.
But I do tend towards lighter things, either what I would call like your more self-help nonfiction, or some sort of more like science fiction or just general fiction. Like a common failure mode is, so one thing that I notice particularly if I haven't slept well is my level of like resistance to further temptations goes way down. Like if I'm gonna schnaff like 2 loaves of bread and a whole cake and a pizza, it's after I've like not slept properly for a night. And this then generalizes to like the kinds of things that I'll end up watching on YouTube, or the fact that I'm watching YouTube at night at all. All of these are kinds of behaviors that only seem to come about in my like very willpower depleted state. So I don't know if you actually have a better answer there, because all I've really managed to say to people is I get in bed and read until I get tired.
Look, I mean, that's ideal, right? It shouldn't be something that requires too much work. I really struggle. My chronotype does not fit well with the sort of mean societal demands. So since about the age of 8 or 9, I've struggled to get up in the mornings and struggled to fall asleep in the evenings. So yeah, it is a struggle.
What's your sort of natural bedtime?
I put in. I feel like I may even just have a not quite circadian rhythm, because it will just naturally just tend later and later if unchecked.
Have you tried like sun exposure?
No, that could.
Sorry to interrupt, but.
So I was going to say, now that could just be as a result of not getting enough sun exposure in the morning and getting too much blue light exposure in the evening. So like in a holiday, when I was on school holidays years ago, that would always be like I would say failure mode of mine, that I would end up staying up later and sleeping later, and eventually I would just become literally just inverted and nocturnal, and it was horrible. But even through undergrad, I struggled with it. It was in postgrad, it wasn't easy either. but when I got to do my research, I could work whenever, right? So I used to just let myself fall into a natural rhythm. And I think that one of the things that does throw me off a lot is also having to be up early, because then I compromise my sleep, and then that throws things off kilter. Whereas if I don't have to be up early, but I have things I want to get going on, then I get up when it's right for my body physiologically, but then I get up and I get going, and so I'm tired and can then fall asleep at a reasonable time. So then it will naturally be more like a sort of 1 a.m. to 10 a.m. type. That's when I would sleep, and then I'm insanely productive. So my research block last year, that was me every single day, like clockwork. And it was fantastic because I didn't sleep. I didn't use an alarm, nothing. I just would get tired. I would get into bed, fall asleep within like 10 minutes. Would wear an eye mask and earplugs because I lived next to a railway track.
Yeah.
And I would just naturally wake up, take off the blindfold, take out the earplugs, and it was like clockwork. It was like 10:01, 10:02 type thing. It was amazing. Now and going forward, I'll probably just, need to be up at certain times. And if that's earlier, it's difficult. So the main thing is if I can get to sleep at the right time, I can get up at the right time. So getting rid of blue light is a major one.
Yes.
In terms of just like the whole practicalities of it. So I have blue light reducing software installed on my laptop and my phone that kicks in automatically. Details wise, Flux on my laptop and the night shift on iOS. I've also purchased blue light blocking glasses, just cheap entry level ones off Amazon that I got brought over. I have never taken the time to do an experiment where I compare that to nights when I don't wear it and still use all the other technologies. But they can't hurt, so I often wear those. Okay. Although it's a bit of a problem because then I can't use my reading glasses or my just actual spectacles, and so I can't see as well for reading or looking at a screen. So it's a bit of a issue there, but I haven't resolved that. So if I'm just sitting around whatever, then I'll use that. But what I have found is not reading or watching material that will hype me up in the hours preceding bed, right? Like I wind down properly. So one of the greatest things for me is audiobooks, fiction audiobooks. And they can be quite engaging. I mean, like a Neil Stevenson type book, even really engaging, super interesting. But it's great because I can like put in some earphones, and I can sit in very low light conditions. Whereas if I'm reading, I'm having lights on. When I'm watching a video, it's a screen, right? So the audio allows me to get away from the screen. And also it's kind of a sort of a natural thing because you can like fade into sleep. Whereas like when you're reading, you've still got to maintain attention and there's light and you're doing something. So yeah, I find audio books of nonfiction very, very useful for that. I've found cold showers beneficial in the past. And then, yeah, just the basics. I haven't experimented with melatonin. I have experimented with original old type antihistamines that are now repurposed as sleeping tablets. But after like becoming familiar with the consequences of that, the fact that you're sedated but not sleeping, well, that's useless now. So fuck it. I'm not going to do that anymore.
Yeah, that's probably another great one.
Yeah, and then I've also tested some things like L-theanine, which is supposed to help just like take the edge off if you've had excessive caffeine or are a little bit jittery or whatever. But I haven't done proper investigations of this stuff just for time and because it was just like, cool, I'll try this and just see if it works like subjectively. I don't know. If it's the placebo effect, that's still useful because it's an actual effect.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's the basics of it. I could talk about this for a very, very long time. I've tested many things over the years, but that's the gist of it. So yeah, I'm interested that you don't struggle with getting hyped up reading things before bed. But I think you're not the kind of person who normally struggles with getting to sleep.
No, I was a terrible, terrible sleeper throughout high school. I mean, I was getting woken up at 6, but only falling asleep at 1 or 2. So I mean, I had spent a chronic amount of time really not sleeping enough.
Which is normal for an adolescent, actually, right? Like, and that's the interesting thing is that you are supposed to shift later and then return to earlier as you pass through adolescence.
So
But yeah, as you were saying.
yeah, so I've definitely gotten better, and I don't struggle as much as I used to. Cold showers were a big help there, and just like really starting to respect sleep as this entity that had such a big effect on me, made me take it like seriously as a lever that could make or break the next day or week. Um, so that helped, and then in terms of like not getting hyped up, I do occasionally end up getting quite. I would put sleep disruption into two buckets. I think, and one is the uncommon bucket, and one is far more common. So there are some times where I do read something and get a little bit too intrigued, and I'll stay up, let's say, half an hour longer reading than I know I should, and that's probably a failure mode that I should try and decrease with time. But and I mean, if it is causing misery, it's a small effect.
Half an hour is pretty small in the scheme of things, yeah.
Right, but ultimately could probably optimize that away. I don't know. But then there's a second kind of sleep disruption, which is more interesting, I think, and I think people might actually get this one wrong, and that is when you get in bed, you've done your winding down routine, you think you're ready to go to sleep, and sleep does not come. And when this happens, I really do find it useful to get up, get out of bed, and for me, it's like sitting down with a piece of paper or a book, and like either trying to like read whatever it is that you're like so interested in that you don't want to sleep, or write whatever it is that's keeping you up. So I do think there's like a small subset of nights where whatever it is that's, I mean, we can talk in terms of like the muse. Stephen Pressfield does a good job of like personifying that idea, but there's sometimes you just need to write or you need to read, and it just feels like this burning desire to know, and that does not really tend to go away so easily, I found.
Yeah, and if you actually just externalize it, and also you don't want to you don't want to start associating bed with not sleeping, right? It's like the classic thing that people always have, like they start falling asleep in front of the TV, and then they go to their bed, and then they suddenly like awake and tossing and turning all night, right? So one thing I forgot to mention that I do is I don't go to bed unless I'm like ready to sleep, and as a result, I don't have an association of not sleeping with bed, right? Like bed is the place that I sleep, and that's bed is the place I sleep. So I will stay somewhere else, low light environment, listening to audiobook, whatever, and then I can be like, oh, cool, I'm starting to feel relaxed and ready for sleep. Now I can go to bed.
That's I like that.
Yeah, so that I've found incredibly useful. Interested to know, let's say you maybe have worked a long shift, or you've been working on some project or some piece of work that, or maybe a social event that's got you like really hyped up and in the zone, and like, you're in that maybe a flow state. Yeah. And now it's like really late, and now you need to like wind down and sort of get to sleep. What have you found helps you with that? Or have you found that that's just something you just like can't get around? Just you've got to just take the time to wind down from those states?
Yeah, I think it's there's very little in the way of like the acute remedy here. I've never really been. I mean, I suppose some people like would take something for that. There's all kinds of herbal, who knows what. But I think it's one of those things where if you've played the game of staying up, then you're gonna have to just go through the motions if you want that routine to continue. Nothing really special on that front, unfortunately.
That's something that I would often struggle with, is if I'm working and I'm really in the flow of things, and then suddenly I'm like, sure, wait, I feel weird. Oh, it's 3 a.m. Oh shit, I should probably get some sleep, but I'm still in that flow state. And how do you wind down from that, especially when you've been focusing on something and it's consumed your thinking for hours and hours? And that can even be social things. I mean, it's, like those times when you can have a conversation with someone or some group of people, and next thing you know, 5 hours have flown by. Yeah. And you don't want to, break those events, because I think flow is almost like as close to the divine as a rational being can come. You literally forget that you and time exist a lot of the time, and it's I think one of the things that makes life enjoyable and valuable. But then you have to come down from that. And then maybe that's also just to do with like my neurochemical predispositions and my personality and experiences that I've had over the years. But I mean, that's one thing for me. Like, I just cannot come down from those flow states to get to sleep.
Yeah, that I think that's the fairly. I've definitely experienced that as well, and sometimes I guess you don't want to.
Yeah.
So to bring us to a close here, Gianluca, I want to ask you for your podcast recommendation of the week, either a whole series or a particular episode. Yeah. Anything that you would really recommend?
Let me think. I can't use my phone because it's recording audio, and I would love to just scroll through and look.
I'll give you mine in the meantime.
Give me a suggestion while I think.
So I started listening to a podcast called Story Collider this week, and they do like personal, intimate, almost orally told, obviously, stories about scientists and their stories. And I found this to be, like, first of all, really well done, not at all overproduced, and some of them are like fantastic guests. I mean, Alan Lightman, but sometimes just people you would never have otherwise heard of. They're just some arbitrary faculty member at an otherwise not super famous college or university, but they're telling either the story of how they got into science, or maybe the moment they had a mentor did something for them that was key to their career, or maybe they had the insight that was the stroke of all their research after that. And I find a lot of the stories to be like really, really inspiring and well told. And the episodes are short and definitely worth a listen if you're at all into science and the process of doing it.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So it's the scientific process, but from the personal perspective of it.
Yeah.
Very cool. I'll definitely check that one out. From my side, I'll make it two recommendations, and as a sort of a counterpoint to yours, I think that with all the sort of productivity and research and information oriented podcasts out there, it's also valuable to have things that aren't like that. And so two podcasts in that vein, one's very popular and one less so, but on the rise, that I found very enjoyable over the years. The first is No Such Thing as a Fish. For those of you who know the BBC show QI, the researchers called the QI elves from that show have formed this podcast, and it's facts that didn't make it into the show that they just found interesting researching every week that they then discuss, and very, very upbeat, very fun, interesting, and intellectually stimulating, but also lighthearted and casual, and you don't have to follow every single word, and very, very humorous. So that's great. That's the kind of thing you can listen to while working out, if you're going on a run or if you're at the gym or whatever, because you can be distracted while you focus on the current set, but then come back to it and it's just something nice. I can't run with music because I naturally sync up to the beat. I'm a very rhythm centered person, and so it's absolutely it's very uncomfortable. And so I have to listen to something else. So I listen to No Such Thing as a Fish most of the time. That's a very popular one. So if people are already familiar with that, another recommendation is it's called the Wikicast. It's just two mildly famous YouTube people who have now created a podcast, and they're just two friends that essentially what the premise of the show is that they one of them brings up a randomly selected Wikipedia article where you just go into Wikipedia and hit the randomize button, and it's usually absolutely weird or totally crap or very short or very long, and it's like a random island off the coast of something that doesn't exist anymore, or it's like some football team for a local region in South Korea or something. Like it's really weird, and they end up discussing it usually for about 15 minutes, and then they get sidetracked much like we do on a tangent and talk about various things, and just get into the weeds. Quite funny, very like meme oriented, so quite amusing, lighthearted, and just an interesting jumble of ideas and wit and occasionally something interesting. So those are my two more lighthearted, easygoing listens.
Ah, very good. Very good.
Cool.
All right, so we'll leave it there.
We'll definitely leave it there because we need to leave sufficient time to consume more nutrients and start winding down for bed because sleep's
exactly
important.
Yeah,
and if you're going to get up at 4 a.m. like Jocko recommends, you got to get to bed early.
Now. Yeah,
start now. Cool. Let's lights off. Let's go. All right. Cool. Thanks. It's been a great chat.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Bit of a Tangent podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please get in touch with us and share your thoughts. You can email us at podtangent@gmail.com or connect with us on Twitter through the handle @podtangent. For more information about us, our backgrounds, and other projects we're involved in, visit our website at podtangent.com. That's podtangent.com. The best ways to support us are to share one of our episodes with someone who may enjoy them, and to give us a rating or review on iTunes. That way, Apple knows that we're actually worth listening to, and all the platforms that pull content from them will too. We both love having these discussions, and relish the opportunity to share ideas with like-minded people around the world. So your support and listenership are sincerely appreciated. Until next time.